So if we explore the nature of the competitive environment, I think the very nature of that environment has changed quite radically. So right now there's a lot of debate around voice costs, maybe less so around voice costs, it's more around data costs, okay? And the access or for the consumer market to have access to a broader level of coverage, higher speeds, at a price point that is affordable to the mass market. So that is, in my mind, sort of still typical of the telco space. But clearly the market is evolving to the next level and is evolving rather quickly. So if we try to unpack what that means in terms of other services that a traditional telco operator needs to bring to market, how do you see that evolving? Bora, maybe if you can give us some examples that you've perhaps seen in some of the more developed markets, understanding, of course, that certainly in the African context, there's probably unique propositions that can be taken to market. What would your view be on that?
I guess, I mean, we need to look into this problem or, this challenge in a different way, because we are always looking at this issue from a supply point of view. On the supply side, I mean, there might be some limitations or, few dominant players on the market. But on the demand side, if you want to make it more affordable, at the end of the day, that affordability should be considered within the context of value to the end user. Because it is really important, especially, I mean, when we talk about, universal service coverage and, universal access to broadband to a wider population, we need to consider what value the end user gets from the digital services or broadband that it is getting. And if it is replacing its, kind of entertainment costs, if it is replacing its kind of educational costs, healthcare costs whatsoever, then you need to look into the value provided through that to the end user rather than the price point that is charged for, because then it is subsidized from other savings to the end user. So until we start focusing on demand side of the things and what it means from an end user, it is a very difficult dilemma just to focusing on a price point and trying to reduce that. Because at the end of the day, providing communication services, as you stated at the beginning as well, very capital intensive, regardless of the player investing on it. And it is driven mostly by the private sector money, which expects some return on those investments. So on that interest, if you just look into this from a pure price point of view, I think it will be a very difficult aspect without a, massive subsidy provided by the government, which cannot be sustainable in the long run. So we really need to look into how we enable demand side of the things, how we bring more value on those networks or on those broadband communication to the end user, so that the value is created or shifted from other savings to this spend.
I agree with Bora. I think what we need to do is we need to calculate the cost of not connecting everybody, of leaving some people out of the economy and isolating them because either one, they haven't got access, and linked to that is affordable access. So it's incredibly important that as an industry, we visit affordable access to everybody and make sure that every individual, has got equal access to the internet, so that 60% of companies that are registered in India today are IoT companies. It's a very easy business to get into. It's cost efficient, and we need to make sure that we enable our next generation to participate in this economy.
You raise an interesting point, and I guess in terms of access to telco type services, one of the big challenges for Africa is that although we have big cities with very high population densities, there's also massive tracts of rural space that needs telco infrastructure. And along major routes, I suppose it's quite easy to solve for this requirement. But as you get off the major routes into the deeper rural areas, there's a very real problem of significant capital investment that is being required, but very low population densities, and also very low revenues per user, service revenues per user. And therein lies a challenge which, in my view, the regulator needs to step up to, because to the extent that you can have models where there's shared infrastructure, but shared active networks infrastructure as well, that then enables the provision of services. So that kind of sounds fairly anti-competitive in a way, because it requires the network operators to collaborate. It requires the regulator to enable that collaboration, which the current regulatory framework perhaps does not necessarily allow for. But how do you see that rural challenge potentially being solved, and being solved very quickly, to allow that part of our economy to become more significant?
There's a lot of really exciting technologies that are currently being tested. There's several white papers that are doing the rounds now on technologies like TV white space technology, which is probably more cost effective to deploy than a fiber network, into a rural area. We also saw, we know that there's some satellite technologies that can be utilized. We earlier, when we were chatting, we were talking about Google's Loon project. So we don't necessarily have to provide, fiber to every single person in the outlying area. And we say that, but there's also ways of reducing the cost of deploying fiber optic infrastructure if you look at the power lines. So government clearly has a strategy to provide every single person in the country with power. And the power grid can be utilized to expand fiber backhaul services into more rural towns. And especially if, like we say, it's legislated, where Eskom has a mandate to provide space on their towers, so that we can reach deeper rural areas. But I think the more exciting and faster method of getting there, I think the thing that certainly has got a lot of people sitting up right now is TV white space.
I guess, this is not a question of technology, in my opinion. There are various technology alternatives out there to serve rural areas. I think it's more about, making it commercially attractive and economically viable. And that is coming back to, efficient use of Universal Service Fund. Exactly the purpose of that fund is created for. So, probably, again, not unique to South Africa, but in many countries as well, we often forget that there is a mechanism that is created for that, to bridge that, digital gap. And it's just a matter of how we really make efficient use of those funds available to bridge that, service gap.
Are you arguing, therefore, that there needs to be a level of subsidization, at least initially,
Definitely,
to get the access and to get the network out to the people?
Definitely. That is, without the subsidization, at least on to get it on its feet, I don't think, it's an easy problem to solve.
And uptake, if government can come on board and make rural areas more attractive by providing their own government buildings, libraries, etc., as anchor tenants, it'll incentivize, operators to push fiber deeper into the networks.
Let's talk for a moment around the readiness of the telco operators to evolve into a digital economy. And for me, what is quite interesting is that there seems to be a growing resistance, certainly in the South African context, for the operators to become pure utilities. Certainly, my view is that none of the operators want to become utility-type companies. I think many of them are trying to get into the services layer in a more meaningful way, and that's into the consumer market, all the way into enterprise and potentially into wholesale. But I suppose that a lot of the prize sits within the consumer space. So mobile financial services, content, and I guess various other potential revenue opportunities that we're not thinking about right now will still come to bear and enable them to evolve their business models. How do you see this potentially playing out?
Well, in my opinion, it depends on who we refer to operators. I think it's a bit of, confusing question at the moment, because we talked about, this infrastructure players becoming more and more of integrated, almost like utility players. I think that's the intention for that evolution to happen, and also given the nature of the debt investments and the investors behind it is really longer term and utility-like investors. But on the other side, today's MNOs or today's dominant communication service providers, I mean, they are definitely moving away from the infrastructure or utility space and trying to differentiate themselves in providing more differentiated digital services. On the enterprise space, there is definitely the cloud type of focus to become almost a cloud partner of the businesses, which is done traditionally by your system integrators. Today, the MNOs is playing a key role over there. And on the consumer space, again, I mean, we have seen most of the communication service providers moving on to music, entertainment, video type of services. And beyond that, I mean, the financial services that you mentioned about and insurance services, and even, I mean, their investments into digital space, like, digital markets, like Juma investment of MTN and whatsoever. And whole idea is, I think, for communication service provider of today is to evolve into a partnership environment, probably a bit different in a structure point of view, because today they are really large and, kind of heavily staffed organizations, probably more lean partnership and marketing-driven entities. So that is the direction that they are taking, or they are trying to achieve, because they are well aware of that their traditional revenue sources is challenged highly. So they have to diversify. So I don't think, I mean, we will see communication service providers becoming utilities, but we will probably see these other independent infrastructure players becoming utilities, so to provide underlying infrastructure services.
I think also it's about, we touched on it earlier, it's about market maturity. Sure. So the mobile network operators are under incredible pressure to reinvent themselves. But what does that mean for them? And what revenues are they leaving behind? They understand what they had, and now they're looking to this new MNO that is being born, and I think they're still trying to come to grips with what is the revenue potential that they can achieve just through providing services, and I think it's a tough time for them, because while they are forgetting about who they were and reinventing where they're going to, I don't think that the use cases are there yet. And I think that they are still waiting for the super application, that is going to allow them to enjoy the same revenues, but not having to invest in ongoing, infrastructure that becomes outdated, and to outsource that. And I think another concern for the mobile network operators are also quality of service. As they outsource this, they have to trust and ensure that they achieve the same quality of service on a network that they don't necessarily have control over. And I think that remains a big headache for the mobile network operators, is to achieve that and to be assured of that.
So they find themselves in a very difficult environment currently, because, as we pointed out earlier, reducing margins, more competition, the need for continuing investment, and at the same time, their fundamental business models are being challenged, right? So we've seen that there's a number of disruptive forces out there, okay? So the over-the-top providers, clearly well documented. We've also seen some of the new technologies coming in. So you mentioned Google Loon, microsatellites at low altitude potentially is a challenge of the future. We've seen potentially other competitive forces that come into the environment in terms of, for example, MVNOs, and it seems to be an increasingly challenging environment. And you use the word maturity. I'm not sure that we're ever going to get to mature, because when we sort of approach a level of getting to mature changes. The reality, the environment changes.